Afternoon, everybody. Happy Sunday. Welcome to the show. Just going to be doing a review of a discussion that popped up. I haven't watched this one. Usually I give these ones a quick listen. I find myself watching Tom Rabbit's videos usually during the work week. I'll have them on in the background while I'm working from home, and sometimes they're entertaining. Oftentimes, since they feature Dawkins, they can be a little irritating, but that kind of goes without saying. Hang on a second here. Let's see here. Just checking to see if anybody's viewing. I think I'm the only one. That's not good. So yeah, I was going to get into this one and just kind of play it and watch it through. I watched like the first minute or so of it, and Darth kind of jumps into his like kind of typical script with this guy, Brad James. I don't know who Brad James is. I'm not familiar with the name. I'm not familiar with the voice either, from what little bit I heard when I kind of test ran this video. So I'm just going to jump into it and play it and then see how it goes, and then I'll just make comments as it plays through. I'll do my best to kind of keep an eye on the top chat as it goes as well. So let's get started here, and let me know in the live chat if you guys can't hear anything. It should be good, but adjust my volume settings here, make sure everything's good. Should be good to go. All right, here we go.
I hope you got this for your recording. Hey, YouTube out there, Tom Rabbit likes to record these. Hey, Tom Rabbit. Brad, why are you an atheist?
Well, can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear.
Oh, very good. Well, I think it's probably the same reason most other people say. It's that I don't see. And first of all,
stop. You lagged out. Okay.
Okay. I see no reason for there to be a creator at all. I see nature. I don't see any evidence for any
Give me
God
1
belief.
second. I have to switch my headset.
All right.
Okay, go ahead.
There's no evidence. There's just claims, and claims are not evidence.
Okay, when you say there's no evidence for God, is that a claim?
That is an observation.
Is that a claim?
Do you feel that it is an observation, which
So like from the jump, I mean, this is kind of typical for Dawkins. He's been doing this for years now, and I don't know how much he's modified this. He usually, if he gets into a discussion with a skeptic, he starts off with the initial question is, why do you deny the existence of God? Why don't you think God exists? What's your reason for being an atheist? How come no God? That kind of stuff. I don't think he's ever put it that, but that's essentially kind of what it boils down to. And while I mean, you could get a little uncharitable and try to like parse apart like different semantic implications from some of the ways he phrases the questions. Specifically the one where he's like, why do you deny the existence of God? You don't necessarily, depending on kind of how you view ontology and epistemology, you don't have to deny the existence of a God. But that's a little complicated, and I'll probably try to flesh that out a little bit later. But from the jump, usually what ends up happening, he'll start with that kind of question. And then usually the skeptic, atheist, or whatever will come back at him and say, well, there's no evidence for it, or I'm not convinced by any of the evidence that I see for it, or something like that. Brad James has already started off by saying, yeah, I think I'm going to be giving you an answer that I think a lot of atheists and skeptics would give you, which is, I'm not convinced that it's real, or there's no evidence for it. Actually, I don't think that's a strong answer for him to give, because there is evidence for the existence of God. I mean, it's just there's not a lot of strong evidence for the existence of God, and I don't think it's not the kind of evidence that would really be that convincing for, I think, most reasonable people. At least that's the position I take. I mean, you could take the narratives that are provided by the Old Testament and the New Testament as being, a kind of evidence for God. But in that sense, the Quran is evidence for Allah. Clearly the Old Testament, the Hebrew Bible, is evidence for Yahweh. And even though that overlaps into the Christian faith, it's still kind of the same. You're still kind of making the same, assertion and trying to use the same kind of category of evidence to try to push that. So I think, you kind of have to be careful especially if you're talking to someone like Dawkins, who's going to jump on any little thing he thinks that's going to go wrong with your defense or your take on things, to acknowledge that, there is evidence for God, but it's not the kind of evidence that you think is particularly strong, or to go into the notion that, you're not convinced of it. That's not actually all that great either, because he's asking, what's your reason for denying God? Why don't you believe in God? What makes you think that there isn't one? And I think that's actually I think that's a question that some skeptics don't really reflect on as well. And I will say this, I got to hand it to Dawkins, because he's been around long enough and talking about this stuff and kind of just beating this kind of presuppositional apologetic long enough that I think this actually does kind of provide a service to atheists in the sense that a lot of atheists and skeptics that watch this kind of Christian apologetics happen on YouTube and other places in the internet, they're used to thinking of themselves and kind of Matt Dillahunty describes himself as a counter apologist. And I think that's what a lot of people who are on the skeptic side think of, like, you're making a claim there's a God, here's my counter to that. What Dawkins is attempting to do, and what he's been doing for a long time, which is sort of is in keeping with the presuppositional apologetic, is to kind of turn that on its ear and demand an apologetic for the faith stance he believes skeptics are taking. And there's not necessarily anything wrong with it. I think the way he goes about trying to do it is hackneyed, clumsy, abusive, obnoxious, irritating, all those other kinds of things. But I think initially what he's trying to do isn't necessarily a bad thing. I think that it's a challenge for skeptics to kind of think in a way other than thinking of themselves in relation to always being in opposition to a Christian position, thinking of themselves in a positive sense. And it's not necessarily, you don't have to come up with reasons why atheism is good, that kind of thing. But just being able to kind of articulate, hopefully as honestly as you can and as coherently as you can, why you hold that you're a skeptic. So greetings, Geo Sam, Tide and Rover, and Kevin Chaos. Thanks for joining. All right, let's go on with this. Let me take a little look at something here. There, okay.
Yeah, you
listen to me. In full disclosure, you should know that I've been doing this for 10 years and I've debated hundreds, if not thousands, of atheists.
I'm aware.
Good. So did you make a claim that there is no evidence for God?
I answered your question, which would be an answer, right?
Okay. Did you make a claim?
According to my observation, yes.
Okay. So when somebody makes a claim, do they need to support that?
Very interesting. I believe that they do need to support that.
Good.
So how do you support a negative?
Okay. Can you please explain to me how you determine that all the facts that you're acquainted with do not necessitate referencing the necessity of God?
Because I don't need them to. I know that there are facts. Facts exist. We see things. I can cross the street without getting hit by a bus. And that is the starting point. I don't need there to be an undergirder. That's the gird.
James, you got to focus on the question. Okay.
Imagine I walk into a crime scene and I'm a detective and there's a gun on the floor. And I say to the other detective, and there's a dead body too. And I say, that gun is not evidence of the murder. And he says, how did you determine that? And I said, oh, because I don't need it to be.
Okay, Parakeet's kind of lost the plot. That's not what's happening there. It'd be one thing to say, I mean, the closer comparison would be, that gun, there's no evidence for that gun being there, and it's like, okay, well, we have observation to back up the fact we see a gun there, we see a body. So, we're dealing with categorically two different things. We're dealing with something observable in the world and then something that is yet to be demonstrated. So while the question isn't necessarily bad here, Dawkins is asking Brad James, like, hey, how are you aren't you making claims? You're making a claim that there is no evidence for God, which I think, like I said before, I think for James is kind of a mistake because there is evidence for God. It's just that I think a lot of skeptics are not convinced by it, so they don't see it as being strong evidence. But anyway, I will.
Okay, give me an analogous situation.
Okay, James.
No, he said something. Now, give me an analogous situation with Christianity.
I don't
That,
need
with
to.
the gun on the floor. Like, well, you don't need to, but that was a claim.
James, listen. There's a tactic that is well recognized and practiced by atheists, where when they're asked certain questions, they will obfuscate, they will prevaricate, and then they will move to plan B, which is to obstruct the conversation either through just being argumentative or through passive aggressive.
This is a very long-winded, I would say, using Darth Dawkins, one of his favorite adjectives, verbose way of poisoning the well.
Techniques. Now, I have asked you a legitimate question. You have stated that there's no evidence for God.
It's true that he's asked part of a legitimate question. There are often times when Darth asks questions that are not really, I mean, if you consider loaded questions to also be legitimate questions, then sure. But generally loaded questions, and he loads his up like, you know, like a Big Mac. I mean, they're just, they're so stuffed full of shit. It's amazing.
God. What that entails is that you've decided that all the facts that you're acquainted with do not necessitate referencing God as the precondition of those facts.
Here we go. This is where we start getting good. I really hope he does to James what he's been doing for the last at least year with a lot of people on his Discord servers. It's an observation I've made it to a few people, and I'd be interested to get some kind of pushback or criticism on. Let's see what he goes here. So he's now asserting that facts necessarily must reference the creator God, right? So from Darth Dawkins' position, God is the all-powerful creator of the universe and all of reality that we experience. So naturally, any fact that we can point to is dependent on that God, right? Everything was created by God. So that's a pretty easy thing to kind of maintain, just kind of just, you know, suspend that in your imagination for a while. That's where Dawkins is getting from. God created absolutely everything. Anything that you can assert as a fact, you know, necessarily references back to this necessary creator being that made everything.
Now, the question is, how did you determine that?
Now he's starting to shift. So he's made a claim about ontology, right? Everything that exists in reality is the product of a creator God, right? That gives us a category of all things that exist in the reality that he's made, including reality itself, is something that he made for us. And now he's starting to shift, and he's switching over to asking James how he knows about some of those facts.
How did you determine that?
How did I determine that I don't believe it?
Let me rephrase the question for clarity. Okay. When an atheist says there's no evidence for God, that is the equivalent of saying all the facts that they're acquainted with do not necessitate referencing the necessity of God.
And he just did it, right? He's doubling up on something here, and it's really kind of weird. I'm going to roll it back just a couple of seconds to get back to that kind of clumsy. It sounds clumsy, but he's doing this on purpose. He's been doing this for a long time, and it took me a while to notice it too, because I thought he was just being imprecise with his language, but he's not. I think he actually believes this is how things work, and it's a little concerning. Maybe even more so than his behavior.
When an atheist says there's no evidence for God, that is the equivalent of saying all the facts that they're acquainted with do not necessitate referencing the necessity of God. What that means is that is an indirect declaration that facts are independent of the necessity of God. Okay, so do you understand that that is the equivalent?
That's not necessarily what's happening here, because it could be the case, and in presuppositional apologetics, it is the case in terms of people being in sin, that one can be acquainted with the facts, but not reach a conclusion that there's no God, or that those facts, you know, the things that are actually part of the state of reality and the state of affairs, as they're referred to in philosophy, that they're not dependent on God, right? There's a difference between the two. And Dawkins, I think, is he's right on track. He's right on schedule to start equivocating between whether or not those facts refer back to a creator God and whether you refer to God when you reference the facts that refer to God.
Yes, I understand what you're trying to say. You're trying to say
No.
if you
You
can't know
understand?
you can't know anything.
Okay.
Is that right?
I didn't say that. Okay. You need to focus on what I'm saying to you, right? When one
Then why don't you
says,
respond to
okay,
what I said?
James, would you not overtalk me, please?
Sure, go ahead.
When one says, I'm treating you very fairly, James.
Yeah, I'm not saying you're not.
Okay. When one says,
Kevin K.S. asked, was that even a coherent statement? Necessitate the necessity? That's kind of what he's doing, and it wouldn't be coherent, but I think it matters for Darth in a way that pops up if you study like some of the original, as some like it turns out the reason I started getting kind of interested in doing these reviews is because I've been having a conversation with Otangelo Grasso, and he's been hanging out more on Discord servers where Darth Dawkins lurks and has his discussions, and he's sort of trying to pick his brain to get ideas for this. So apparently Otangelo Grasso is he's, I think implicitly, I don't know that he's explicitly admitted this, but he's kind of in the process of shifting from taking evidentialist argument approaches towards apologetics to shifting over to kind of the Presup one. And I've had some exchanges with him where he's more or less admitted that he thinks the Presup apologetic is a lot stronger. Rhetorically, it might be from certain angles, but it actually kind of falls apart if you study it, from both sides, especially if you start doing internal critiques of it. It doesn't hold up well. But I don't think that Grasso has gotten there yet. But anyway, while he's been talking about this, he's been in exchange with this, and he and I have been discussing the possibility of doing a live stream. One of the things that came up was a book that was recommended to Otangelo by Darth Dawkins, and it's a book from the early 80s called Every Thought Captive, from Richard L. Pratt Jr., who was very influenced by Cornelius Van Til and that kind of presuppositional apologetic, and he attempts to distill it. It's a 150-page book. I read it, I read it last week, and it's trying to distill Van Tilian presuppositional apologetics for like a late high school, maybe early college kind of age audience to kind of get them moving in that direction. And it's interesting to see, like, reading something that was published in 1979, 1980, and seeing some of the arguments that are being made there and how they've kind of changed over time. Because in some ways, Pratt's book has some very unsophisticated ways of dealing with objections. Like it kind of puts some things out there that a lot of skeptics online have been arguing about for at least 5 years. Benghazi says, how cute Otangelo is a DD groupie now. Yeah, he kind of is. Otangelo has been kind of critical of Darth Dawkins' behavior and his attitudes towards people, and now I think he's sort of pushed that to the side because he wants to kind of I don't want to paint Otangelo as being kind of like cynical or kind of opportunistic in this case, but I think he's trying to mine Darth Dawkins' experience in doing this, because Dawkins has just been sort of trying to refine his presuppositional apologetic to a razor's edge over the years, and he just keeps going after people. I think in a way that Otangelo is looking to a fairly decent example, because most of the time when people, and this includes myself, I've engaged with Darth Dawkins a couple of times. Usually if you start engaging with his questions, they're not good questions, and if you don't have, I wish I'd actually been exposed to the book that Otangelo was nice enough to email to me, because it gave me a different appreciation for the presuppositional apologetic, mostly because I was looking at it in kind of its early stages. In fact, that book was published probably 2 or 3 years before Reformed epistemology was really created as something, and that was from Planting and and a few other people, and it was sort of like, it's not in opposition to presuppositional apologetics, it's just kind of a slightly different take. They kind of, I don't know, it's almost like it borrows from presuppositional apologetics, but it doesn't take the sort of like dogmatic assertions that precepts will. Yeah, Benghazi, thanks for asking. Other than some shoulder pain and I'm a little bit tired, I'm actually running a low-grade fever right now. I was last night. But other than that, no, don't really feel bad. About an hour after I got it, it kind of kicked in, felt just kind of low energy for about 3-4 hours. Kind of took a nap, snapped out of it, then was insatiably hungry for like 2 hours. And then, yeah, for the most part, it's been fine. Slept like the dead last night. Still kind of run down now feeling, but yeah, it's not bad. It's not like, it kind of feels like I've had some reactions to flu vaccines that have been like this. Shoulder pain is a little bit closer to what you'd get like out of a tetanus shot. But I've had shoulder pain reactions to flu vaccines that were much, much worse than I got from the Pfizer one. So it's not too bad. Let me see here. Yeah, Clockwork. This is why I left that Discord. I joined that Discord. If you're talking about the Reformation one, Clockwork, I did join it. I got kicked out within seconds of talking to Darth. He asked a question of me, do you think I'm being abusive? And he just got done yelling at somebody, and I was like, well, yeah. And then he asked me why. I said, well, because everything about your attitude and your stance and the way you ask questions kind of shows that you're on Discord to be abusive. He didn't just kick me; he banned me. So the Reformation server is off for me. Let's see. Clockwork, get a Big Mac, Jeff. Is that I know I can get a Krispy Kreme donut. Krispy Kreme is offering free donuts to people who get their shots. Is McDonald's doing the same thing? Or are you just referencing Big Mac because I mentioned Big Mac earlier? Let's see. Skywork 600, welcome. I don't know that I know you. Otangelo believes in the Christian God, but has no substantive evidence and runs with the same vacuous arguments as other theists. Yeah. I mean, I don't know that the Presup one. I think ultimately is kind of vacuous because of just sort of the just ballsy assertions that they make, and I think they would be better off taking a philosophical approach that was less explosive, and I mean that in kind of the scale. Like if anybody's looked into paraconsistent logic or what's it called, Deletheism or whatever that is, that where you kind of believe in, it's a philosophy that studies contradictions that can also happen to be true. The idea of something exploding is sort of things meeting a contradiction and they kind of terminate and you can't go anywhere. Paraconsistent logics kind of like play around in that dynamic. Midnight, I'll probably give a link out here pretty quick, but I'm going to push forward through this a little bit and we'll see where we go. Let's see here.
There is no evidence of God. That is the equivalent of saying facts are independent of God. Okay? You accept that?
So you're saying that I can't know a fact is a fact unless I associate it
James,
with
in this entire conversation, when I have asked you very clear questions, you're not being focused and answering the specific.
Well, I'm focused, but I don't understand your phrasing.
James, I'll repeat the question.
I know you.
When one says, James, see, this is typically what atheists do. Okay,
Darth Dawkins would waste a lot less time if he didn't have to, like, if he gets quote unquote interrupted, if somebody tries to like assert themselves and try to finish a point or something like that, it happens more than once. Then he goes right back into poisoning the well, as if any of the sycophants that are following him don't already think that atheists are just natural born scum. It's a complete waste of time, not only for the skeptics he's arguing with, but for himself and for any of his fans. He's just doing this to kind of like, preen in front of his weirdos, which I don't even think he really even cares for anyway. So it's sort of, I don't understand why he does this. It seems more and more like it's like a verbal tick. Like he just has to make sure he hammers something. See, this is what they do. They're so dishonest. Like, assuming that everyone's dishonest before you've even ruled out whether or not they're just mistaken or confused is a dick move. And if he's supposedly if his knowledge, his epistemology and his ontology are being influenced in some supernaturally beneficial way from a Holy Spirit that he claims exists, he should not be engaging in these sort of basic, rational problems like shit posting, assuming the worst of his opponents, just a complete, not only a lack of charity, but a demonstrable hostility towards people by making assumptions about their character that are not in evidence yet. He's not assuming that they're confused or wrong, right? He'll tell them that they're wrong, but it's not that they're confused, it's that they're lying. They're dishonest. They're trolls. They're trying to trick him. That's the spectrum that he operates in. First they lie, then they troll. It never seems to be. I think you're confused. Let me clarify. Let me paraphrase this in another way. That's not what he's here to do. He's here to stomp the shit out of somebody he's already decided is there dishonestly and is there to trick him or catch him. And at this point, he's developed so much ill will. He's not entirely irrational in thinking that. Like at this point, people are, rhetorically, in the sphere out to get him. So.
I've been doing this for 10 years. Do you think that your response to me is something new?
Yeah, I think it is. I don't think
No,
you've
it
ever
is
heard
not.
this before.
You're not understanding. Your response is actually very typical. It's called obstructionism.
No, it's
It
called
is a refusal to answer the plainly asked question. Okay. Now, when one says there is no evidence for God, that is tantamount to saying that all the facts that you're acquainted with are independent of God.
See, and this is the corner that Brad painted himself into by making just that sort of casual. That was sort of just an almost throwaway answer to the initial question. This all started because Darth asked him, "Why don't you believe in God?" or "Why do you deny the existence of God?" And he's just like, "Well, I don't think there's any evidence for God, right? I see no evidence for God, or there is no evidence for God." Either way you make these claims. Now, if you make the stronger claim, there is no evidence for God, clearly in a case like this, Dawkins is not going to let that go. Right. The best way for James to get out of this would probably be to say, yeah, I actually misspoke. I think there is evidence for it, but it doesn't convince me. Mostly because what's happening now is that Dawkins is he's going to go the same direction. It's not going to matter. Whether you say, I do acknowledge that there's evidence for God, I'm not convinced by that evidence. Right. Then Dawkins is going to he's going to try to get you into a position where he makes it the case that your reliance on your own reason is incoherent because you're denying his God exists. In this case, he's got a much easier tack to take because at this point, he's trying to get James to do the same. Like now, he wants to know if James thinks that facts exist independently of God. Right? It's the same basic thing because from Darth's perspective, everything relies on God. So it doesn't matter if you say there's no evidence. Oh, yeah. Well, so you think there are facts, but you think that they can't rely on God. Then what do they rely on? Or you say, well, yeah, there's evidence for God. It's just not convincing evidence for me. Oh, are you determining that by your reason? Isn't your reason dependent on something? Isn't the fact that you have reason a fact? That depends on God. Right. So he thinks he's got everybody coming and going. It'll be interesting to see. I don't think he's going to get very far with Brad. And this clip is only like 13 minutes long, so I think he's probably going to flame out here pretty quick.
Okay, are we clear?
Well, we both agree that Allah doesn't exist, right? How did you determine that?
Brad, listen to me. I'm going to ask you a question, okay? And I'm not trying to insult you. Have you been drinking tonight? Have you been drinking tonight?
No.
Darth is talking about the concept of evidence.
Brad, you need to respond specifically to what I am asking you.
Would you like a yes or no?
Okay, listen carefully, Brad.
Yes.
If one says there is no evidence for God,
right,
then what one is proclaiming, whether you realize it or not, is that facts are independent of God. Are we clear on that?
Not necessarily. What they're saying is
no, James, listen to me carefully.
I can't say
James.
Yes.
It necessarily follows. Okay, you cannot escape this. If you say that, okay, James, listen to me. You see, this is what you are doing is no different than literally hundreds and hundreds of atheists that I have dealt with in the past. This is nothing new. What it's called, James, what you are doing right now, it's a form of obstructionism. And
so we're right back to where. So this time it took like three or four moments of Darth getting triggered, a little bit angry and irritated with Brad James, and then he's right back to reasserting this idea that the atheist does this all the time. The atheist is this bad. The atheist will obstruct and obfuscate and lie and then troll and then attack me personally. Right? Like it's just going to escalate up to there, depending on like what level of rage Dawkins hits. The sad thing about this is that at no point is he gonna like wind this back and sort of like kind of like walk Brad James through like what his epistemology and ontology are, because the strength to Dawkins' argument is that it's kind of it's confusing because he's equivocating his epistemology and his ontology. He has internalized a presuppositional apologetic to the point where if you take it, especially from the sort like the one source that I've got that I think influences him, you cannot be independent of God. Right? That's actually kind of the nature of sin, as laid out by some of the people that he likes. So you can't try to sit there and evaluate a fact independent of God. And if you're trying to rely on your own reason, that's basically that's self-refuting as well, right? That's his kind of epistemology, and then the ontology that he has sort of informs that. But I mean, there's a lot of reasons why I think they don't work, but I have to probably bring somebody in here to like ask questions to kind of sort that out, because I've kind of been like mulling some of this stuff over in my brain. But he's not going to wind Brad James back to the beginning and say, here's what I think is going on. That facts all depend on God. They depend on some ultimate source. You're trying to say that there are facts out there. You're trying to state the fact that there's no evidence for God. That as a fact, that can't be a fact, because all facts rely on God, right? You can't have it be a matter of fact that there's no evidence for the God that all facts, in fact, rely on. But you won't hear Dawkins put it that way, right? He's just going to keep hammering him with interrogations until the guy gets frustrated and leaves. Or generally what I think Dawkins is looking for is another kind of rhetorical slip up. He'll look for James to assert something and then demand how he knows that. That's all Dawkins is doing. He's just not as obvious and overt as a lot of early presuppers were on YouTube. Like, how do you know that? 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 But he's gotten a little bit, he's shorthanded a lot of steps in his apologetic. Clockwork Rex points out, we can't survive without plants. That makes them gods to us. I mean, yeah, but not in a metaphysical sense, right? I mean, we're all now you're denying the creator-creature distinction, Clockwork. Oh, Camille, thanks for showing up. I don't understand this. Why are they not just talking about Jesus? Yeah, they could go the Pine Creek route, and yeah. It would be funny to me if more people did that, but I think most people, if they want to like have a conversation with Darth Dawkins, it's going to last more than a minute at this point, because I'm sure Dawkins, I mean, obviously he experienced that, but I'm sure he's seen that people are sharing that interaction that he had with Doug from Pine Creek. He's just going to, anybody that tries to mimic that is just going to be dismissed as a troll and then banned. And I really do think he'll be banning them, not kicking them. Let's see here. Tangelos, your stream is right now entirely futile. No, it's not. I'm just pointing out, I'm just commenting on an interaction between Dawkins and Brad James, and I don't think Brad James is doing a great job, so it's not entirely futile. Hey, Marty, welcome. Let's see here.
And prevarication.
And evasion.
You and what?
And evasion, right?
Yeah, you are being evasive. Now, I've made it very clear to you.
Honestly, what you're trying to do is you're trying to shift the burden of proof to
James.
Do you feel you hold the burden of proof? Do you feel
all
that?
what you have just done right there, that is another knee-jerk reaction that we typically see among atheists. And I'm not trying to psychoanalyze you, okay? But what you have just done is another atheist cliche. And that cliche is when you are asked to unpack your position, when we ask further clarifying questions, because you are uncomfortable in answering or don't want to answer the question, then you fall back onto the atheist cliches, such as you're shifting the burden of proof. Okay?
Don't you feel you have a burden of proof, though?
Okay, James. What was the opening question? James.
Do I never get to ask a question, or is this just I got the light on me?
Okay. How about you act like an adult and actually answer my legitimate questions?
I'll try.
Okay. I have not been unfair with you, but I have been assertive not to allow you to prevaricate, and I'm going to call you out when you prevaricate. Now, listen carefully.
These are not conversations.
James, I want you to listen. James, I'm probably double or 3 times your age. Okay.
No, you're actually not, but that's okay.
Okay. How old are you, James?
Let's just say that within 20 years.
James, how old are you?
Why does that have to do with anything?
Because you told me that I'm not double or 3 times your age.
Yeah, because it's irrelevant to.
No, it is
have
relevant.
sort of-
Let's see if I'm wrong. How old are you, James?
I don't think it's relevant.
It is relevant,
That's the last 4
James.
years social.
James, okay, James, this is why we do not take any atheists seriously, because you are exemplifying the very kind of.
That's a problem. If you don't take any atheists seriously, what are you doing talking to them? That is a deficiency of charitability at that point. That makes, I mean, and I'm not, and this is not like a poisoning the well kind of thing. You're basically admitting that from the jump, if a person identifies as an atheist or a skeptic, you're not going to take what they say seriously. So why talk to them, right? This is this is a problem that a lot of presuppers get into, especially sort of like aging cage stage Calvinists like Darth Dawkins. They run this precept to the point where they're willing to take it to a point where they're not going to stop digging in and going after skeptics. But it's, I mean, you don't have to psychoanalyze them or read between the lines. Somebody like Dawkins will come right out and tell you, I don't respect you. I don't believe you. I don't take any of your claims seriously. I think you guys are jokes. At best, I think you're liars. At worst. And he will literally say, there's no point in talking with you. He will continue to talk to them. Right. So this is more of that, like, if the weird thing about this is, from his particular, whether he's reformed into reformed theology or whatever, certain aspects of the things that he's blaming individuals for are not their fault, right? They're not capable of regenerating their own spirit. So if they're as bad as Dawkins insists they must be, he's blaming the sinner for the sin, right? He's hating the sinner as well as the sin. I've actually heard him say, well, hate the sin and not the sin. Dawkins is not that kind of person. He doesn't roll that way. And he's been called out by Christians on Discord for taking this stance with people, because if he is a real Calvinist and he understands that theology, he knows that these people can't help but be either confused, self-deceived, and even in the process of deceiving others until their hearts are regenerated by the Holy Spirit. And I've listened to people attempt to give that correction, or at least present that concept to Dawkins, and he blows them off. Like he's too old. He doesn't need your correction. He's been at this game for a decade. He's been doing this shit since the 80s or whatever he likes to say. So yeah, he's not going to change. But to me, that's one of the fatal flaws to this kind of thing. If beyond this weird philosophical, rhetorical structure of his apologetic, at the heart of it, he is deeply flawed in his theology. If you're going to take an internal critique of it, unless he believes that people are individually at fault, he sort of ends up having this kind of. He's one of the types of people that he's willing to accept Calvinistic determinism and Arminianism and conflate and just pick and choose both of them, Chinese menu that, so he gets the worst of both worlds. God ultimately, you have no choice in what's going to happen, right? You are ultimately dependent on God, but you are at fault for not making the right choices. And if you are a monergist or a synergist, or if you engaged in those discussions, you know where those contradictions can start popping up. And Darth doesn't, from what I can see, he just seems to be brushing them aside. Hey, Doubting Thomas, I was just going to ask if Darth asked how old he was. Not yet. We'll see. Let's see. All right, here we go. We're almost done with this, and then I'm probably going to open up the room. I'll put out a link, and then we'll go from there, because this is just about done.
Conduct of prevarication and obfuscation
Speed
that
it up.
atheists regularly engage.
Okay.
Why are you over talking me, James?
Go ahead.
Okay, this is what you're doing. Atheists go from plan A to plan B. Plan B is to obstruct the interaction. Now, we're going to start all over. You stated there is no evidence for God. Then when you say there's no evidence for God, you mean all the facts that you're acquainted with are not evidence for God. So those facts, in your view, are independent of God. Are we clear?
those facts are not independent necessarily of God.
No, you're not. Okay, then if they're not necessarily not dependent upon God, then you can't say they're not evidence for God. You've now contradicted. James, listen carefully. I do not say this to impugn you, but you have now contradicted yourself. Listen carefully. Either you believe that all the facts that you are acquainted with necessitate referencing God, or you don't believe that. Well, you've told us where you stand.
Or you use facts and do not attribute it to a God or not to a God.
Okay, James, you see, this is another problem. Earth to James. Why do you think, I'm asking you a sincere question. Why do you think I asked you how old you are?
Because you want to be able to say, I'm going to be 60 next year.
No, James. The reason why I asked you how old you are, because your conduct is exemplifying immature, argumentative behavior that we would expect to see at the cafeteria table at 9th grade lunch hour.
And he would know, because that's, you know, like I'm always surprised at this. Like, he doesn't, you know, I'm not going to psychoanalyze here, but he will psychoanalyze to try to pigeonhole somebody's maturity level or something like this. And this is kind of typical. I've seen him do this to people who are worked up or to people who are calm, where he'll try to use this kind of thing, right? And this is a sloppy dodge. And he needs to get called out. He does get called out on this, but he's not going to stop. Some of his sycophants and stuff, they need to start like telling him like, hey, you know what? But they'll get banned if they do. Like, knock that shit off, right? You can be a 70-year-old idiot, right? You can be very immature. You can be a very mature 15-year-old, right? It doesn't matter. And he'll acknowledge that if he's got somebody in there that's just. I've noticed that he seems to be okay with people who are very vague and almost like, you know, like either on a lot of Xanax or something, like if they're practically sedate. And even if he gets worked up at some of their responses and stuff, if their voice doesn't really change, they never, you know, you never catch an edge to their voice. Like they're not moved one way or the other about some of the claims he's making. He'll be like, well, I think you've been very respectful and all this kind of stuff. So yeah, there's something wrong with, I'm pretty sure there's something wrong with his brain. Let's see here. Marty coming out. Yep, they tell people they are going to hell because they love you. Well, they love you. They don't want you to go to the bad place. But then they tell you that God is love. That means love is God. That means love is going to the bad place for some people. So, yeah. When Darth goes to, that's just another atheist cliche. It means he is presented with a damning assertion for which he has no answer. Yeah, it kind of is. Well, but in some cases, it's, I mean, Brad is hoping like, he's like trying to accuse Darth of like shift, you know, he's trying to shift the burden of proof. That's the whole point of a presuppositional apologetic, right? Is to shift the burden of proof onto somebody else. But it's even bigger than that, because they're essentially like, I'm asserting that the only reason that any of this stuff is real is because God allows it. And that's the, and from my opinion, that's the only way that anything reasonably makes any sense. You have to assume that something gave us all this stuff, and including the ability to think about all that stuff, in order to even say anything about whether or not that stuff is there, or to even think about maybe some of that stuff's not there. That's a huge problem, because they've made an assertion about something that affects not only all things that exist, but how they can even know about the things that exist. And it's actually pretty simple, because usually Dawkins hasn't actually even gotten that far with Brad James at this point. But usually what he will end up doing is he will ask somebody essentially about facts necessitate referencing an absolute creator being. They reference back to God. He'll then ask the person if they believe that it's not necessary for them to reference God when they invoke a fact which references God. To that, I would say, no, that doesn't matter. And that's from within the presuppositional apologetic, because even within presuppositional apologetics, a person who is in sin or is committed to their independence, as some presuppers say, they're disregarding the creator-creation distinction. They can accidentally get certain things right, which means they can identify correctly existing facts. So it is whether or not a person references God while referencing a fact which references God is irrelevant, right? It only that first part of that statement only matters to the condition of that person's epistemology. The second part is referring directly to ontology. And when Darth says this, I don't know if he's intending to do this or not, or maybe that's part of his argument if you get further along. The ontology seems to depend on the epistemology, which is weird. And at one point, he even told another person in another Discord hangout, if there's a no God world, then it is the case that all facts, no facts reference a creator God because it's a no God world. And then goes on to say like that, so you wouldn't be required to reference the necessity of that God if that God doesn't exist. But the thing is, in a no God world, you could have someone referencing a creator God, whether or not like that's their claim, that's their epistemology. They could be wrong about that. And he doesn't seem to understand that within a presuppositional apologetic, presuppositional apologists have made the claim that sinners and people who are confused or led astray by Satan, or however it works, can get facts right. But there's other aspects of their thinking that is wrong. So the trap that I think Dawkins tries to set up for people is not an effective. It's not a convincing one, and I don't think it's effective. Hey, Santi, welcome.
But you're acting like a proctor. You're not.
I'm acting like a what?
A proctor. Somebody who is like.
Okay, so here we go again. Thank you, Shannon Q. Ducklips. Who knew that Shannon Q. Ducklips could impersonate a male-sounding voice? What you just did is exactly what she did in that video. What you are now doing is you are being argumentative in order to derail answering the question that I'm putting to you.
Well, to be fair, I've heard a lot of your conversations.
Okay, to be fair, I want to stick to the conversation.
Okay.
Now, if you say that all the facts that you are acquainted with do not necessitate referencing God, notice they do not necessitate referencing God, then that means that they're independent of God. Because if they necessitated referencing God, they wouldn't be independent of God. Now, if facts do not necessitate referencing God as the precondition of those facts, then you do believe that facts are independent of God and that you will hold to the independence of facts relative to God until shown otherwise. So you do believe that facts are independent of God.
Well, you know my answer, but
again, that wouldn't matter. If Brad believes that facts are independent of God, that's part of his epistemology. It doesn't change the fact of whether or not everything that facts refer to depends on God. If you believe in like facts corresponding with the thing, or the facts are the thing, it depends on kind of how you. But that's a weird, fucked up philosophical thing. But either way you do that, there's the ontology, like this. There's the stuff that actually is, and then there's and there's James over here saying like, well, yeah, we can know that this thing's this and this thing's that, and that I don't think that depends on a God. Okay. But there's a difference between what's going on in James' head and how he thinks he knows things, and what's actually the case in the real world around us. So, try that again. Somebody tried to unpin that. I think that link is wrong. Let's see. Unpin that message and remove it. Let's try this one. There we go. All right, let's get through the last of this. I think there's just a little bit left. So,
to move it along, let's just say yes. I know there.
No, James. What I would like to know from you, what I would like to have occur, is not for you to be the typical sleazy, deceptive, dishonest atheist that I've been dealing with for 10 years. James, you believe that fact. Okay, bye, James. Hit the road. Yeah, there we go. He's gone. Okay. And people say that I'm not patient.
Yeah, that's the end of that. All right. Let's see if anybody's joined back here.
Hey.
Hey, Tanya.
What's up? I don't know. I go by many names. Just call me what you want.
Like Satan.
Basically. So that was a stream. Wait, is this the actual Darth Dawkins, or is somebody?
Yes, I am.
Oh shit! Hey.
Yeah.
Hello.
I was told you were doing a review. Now, the bad news is I have to leave in 10 minutes.
The bad news is that Angelo should mute.
The good news is
mute the stream.
The good news is, hold on a second. I have to pick somebody up. I have to leave in about 10, 15 minutes. And I have to pick up somebody, but that will just take me 10 minutes. And I should be back to stay as long as you want. Okay? So I didn't hear what transpired. So.
Oh. Well, you can always go back and watch it. I was just going through the conversation that you were having with James. I don't think James was making good arguments, and I don't think he was giving good responses to the questions you were asking.
Okay. Are you an atheist or a theist?
I'm an atheist.
Okay. Why?
Because I think most concepts of God are incoherent.
Okay. Is the most or all?
Most.
Okay. Well, that doesn't get you to atheism then. Atheism
No.
is either the direct or the indirect denial of God. Okay.
Of
So
most
that doesn't-
gods, yeah.
Yeah, that doesn't get you to atheism.
Well, but I mean, if you were having a discussion, you wouldn't allow me to say I'm an agnostic. So, and I'm not.
Well, I'm asking you why you deny the existence of all God concepts. Most does not include all.
I don't.
Does anyone else have static or running water?
That doesn't get you to atheism.
It's not you, Midnight. It might be. Hang on a second.
It might be. Yeah, it's Darth.
Yeah, I think it's coming through. I think it's coming through your mic, Darth. There's a low hiss going on.
Let me reload.
Yeah, that was kind of weird. It was like running water, or like, I don't know. I mean, it wasn't too bad, but I was like, you know.
Yeah. Let's see if it's doing it now.
Okay, is that any better?
It's still there. It's not. It doesn't really bother me. If anybody in the chat,
I don't know why that's happening.
I mean, it's not.
it's not
too
covering up
bad.
anybody's voices. Yeah.
Let me just see. Quit a couple of programs. Let's see.
Now it's getting a little.
Okay,
It sounds
so
like there's like a small fan in the background.
atheism is either the direct or indirect denial of all God concepts. Okay? So the fact that most God concepts you might consider incoherent does not get you to atheism.
I don't know that I would take that stance. I think atheism would be the denial of God, or particular gods. I don't think it's because I wouldn't deny even the Christian God as a concept. I deny that it's actually a thing.
Okay. Do you directly or indirectly deny all God concepts?
I don't. I probably directly would deny. Well, no, I don't know that I would deny any God concepts. I directly would deny claims of the actuality of a God.
Okay. Well, the rejection that there's any ultimate fundamental creator God, the non-acceptance of that is a de facto denial, whether you realize it or not.
I would probably agree with that part. Yeah.
So good, then you're denying all God concepts. How did you determine that there is no God?
Again, because I think as if it exists as an actuality, I think that it's incoherent.
Okay. How is
But I
the
wouldn't
concept
deny.
that
I
what-
don't deny the
Okay.
concept in terms of like if it's a narrative, if it's an idea that's
How?
going to, or if it's a component of an idea banging around in people's head that they can use to construct beliefs. I don't deny that.
How is the concept that what is fundamental and the source of all possibility a mind? How is that incoherent?
How is that incoherent? Because that's not the only thing being proposed by a God.
No, that would be a minimalist definition that would apply to other God concepts, unless, of course, we're talking about, demigods like at the Greek and Roman pantheon.
But that belief.
Listen, you got to focus on.
No,
what I'm
hang
saying.
on. The belief that if you're talking about a mind that holds those ideas within its own thoughts, right? It's one thing to say that it contains the concepts of we have
You're
this
not
mind.
following me.
Okay, well, then repeat the question. Repeat.
You
your
said,
question.
okay, either your position is all God concepts are incoherent or some. Which is it?
I would most, because not all of them are incoherent.
Okay, that doesn't get you to atheism then.
It does
Because
when it comes to a Christian
so-
God.
No,
I believe
you're
it.
not-
I believe
you're not,
that.
yeah, Jefferson. I don't mean to be rude, but you're talking past me. You're not even focusing on what I'm saying. Okay.
You only
Atheism-
acknowledge one God in actuality. Right?
Jefferson.
No, I can. No. No.
Wait.
Hang on. I'm going to mute
It
you right
doesn't-
there. Nope. going to mute you right there because this is my channel, and I'm not going to let you like try to like monopolize this.
No,
I'm going to
I'm
ask
not
you.
monopolizing
Nope.
anything.
I'm going to mute you again. You do this again, and I'm going to remove you. I'm going to put you in the backstage until I get my.
You can remove me, but you're being unfair. Okay. You're being entirely unfair.
How am I being unfair? I'm trying to make a point.
Because when I'm trying to explain, you're cutting me off, and I'm explaining.
Okay, I'm putting you in the back room until I can get this point across, because I'm not going to go back and forth with you on this.
Angelo, just let Jay talk. Jesus Christ!
No, let me just.
Thanks, Midnight. No, hang on. This is what I want to say, because this is an important. It's an important.
Sorry,
distinction.
Jeff.
Even the Christian God, like in any of its kind of components, if we're talking about an omni-creator being, an absolute foundation, I would not deny that as a concept, because I think as a concept it is a very real thing. What I deny as an atheist is that particular version of a God, a kind of foundationalist omni being coherent in actual reality. That's my issue.
Okay, Jefferson, can I give you a quick a suggestion before you call Darth to the stream again?
Sure.
I've been several days at his Discord channel, and his way of interacting is he monopolizes the conversation. And as soon as you try to interrupt him, it will not last long. So if I understand that. Okay, so I would suggest give him a chance just to talk as much as you want, and don't interrupt him, and try to digest his concepts. That's what I am doing.
Well, no, that's fine. My issue was he'd brought this up, and I was answering yes and no. And when I would try to take time to flesh out what I'm talking about, because I have a feeling he's trying to, I think, kind of reinterpret or recharacterize what I'm saying, and I don't think he's getting my point when I'm trying to make a distinction between the concept that I don't deny and the actual, God as an actual state of affairs is something that I deny. I don't have a problem with his assertion that that's an implicit or explicit denial of his God. Okay. I am explicitly denying that particular God as an actual thing, but not the idea of it.
Okay, I give you this suggestion, Jefferson. I think that Darth's reasoning is very sound and very logic, but if you want to have actually that it lasts a little bit, your conversation with him, just let him talk. Don't interrupt him.
Well, that's fine, but I'm going to put the same thing to him. If I need to give an explanation and he's going to try to overtalk me in my own channel, I'm going to backstage him until I can make my point. So now I concede your point, Otangelo. That's good advice. I will let him talk here. I'm going to bring him back into the room. I'm going to let him repeat his statement as long as he needs to ask my questions. I will try to keep my answers as brief and as yes or no as possible. But I do insist that when I want to, if his rebuttal or his rejoinder is to try to, I think that he's changing or misconstruing what I'm saying, I am going to put a pause in it and I'm going to clarify. It's my channel.
Well, I think he will interrupt you, Jefferson, when you are not directly responding to what he is asking or what he is saying, and when you try to sidestep. I've seen him doing that many times, and if you focus exactly on responding what he is asking, then he will not interrupt your answer.
Sure. Okay. All right.
He has to leave.
Okay. First of all, I asked you a question about your worldview. Okay. Yeah. What I believe positively about the world at this juncture is irrelevant. Okay. It doesn't matter what I believe in order for you to adequately answer the question. Now, I mentioned at the outset that I have to leave. I have to leave in 4 or 5 minutes at the outermost. After I run an errand, I can be back in 15 minutes, and we can do this for half an hour, an hour. Okay. Now, if I critique or criticize you, it's not personal, right? If I say, for example, you're not focusing, okay, that is not coming from me being sleazy or trying to throw you on the bus, because I literally believe you're not focusing on the question. Now, the issue is not concepts. We're talking about the actuality of God, that God ontologically exists. Now, do you believe that there is not even do you believe that what is fundamental to all possibility in reality, do you believe that it is personal or impersonal?
That's a loaded question.
No, it is not. There is no inherent objectionable premise.
First of all, I would have to establish whether or not I think there is something fundamental. If you were saying something like a unified string theory, I would say it's impersonal. If you're trying to say it's connected to a personality, it would be
I'm not
personal.
talking about physics, okay? Listen very carefully. Number one, it is not a loaded question. There is no, I will tell you why it is not. This is a classic example that when I ask a circumspect question, when people either don't know how to answer the question or don't want to answer it, the knee-jerk reaction is to impugn the question. There is no, okay, what is the implicit objectionable premise within the question?
I have to assume foundation, some kind of absolute foundation.
Okay,
first.
well, if you do you reject the notion that anything is fundamental and the source of all possibility?
Potentially, yes.
No, I didn't say, see, potentially is not an answer. Either you accept that something is fundamental and is the source and ground of all possibility. Okay, what in philosophy, what we call the ground of all being. Either you believe that something is fundamental or you do not. Which do you believe?
I don't have an answer to that question.
Okay. Well, then if you don't have an answer to that question, then you cannot object to the concept of God. Because if you're an atheist, atheism is the direct or indirect denial of all God concepts. What all God concepts have in common, when we are not including creatures that we call God, right? And by creatures, I mean they're temporal, they begin to exist, they're derivational. What all creator God concepts have in common is that they are categorized as fundamental to reality, and they are the source of all possibility, and that fundamental grounding is personal. It is a mind. Okay? Now, you either accept that or you do not accept it.
I don't accept that.
Okay. Okay. So do you then believe that what is fundamental to and the source of all possibility is impersonal, or is it the case that you reject that anything at all is fundamental?
The first choice, I would say that I would probably push back on the idea that it's personal.
Okay, so you then believe as an atheist that what is fundamental is impersonal. Is that correct?
If there's something that's fundamental, I'm more inclined to believe it's impersonal.
No, you're not focusing. Okay,
I am.
No, you're not. I wouldn't have said it otherwise.
Okay,
I don't
Nope.
criticize.
Nope. I'm not going to let you do that. I know you have a few minutes. I'm going to say this right now, and I know Tangela's probably grousing. Here's what I mean by that. I don't believe in this particular case, right? I'm willing to concede for your argument. And he just took off. Okay, well, that's fine. He had to leave anyway. For the purposes of Darth's argument, I'm willing to concede that it's got to be a personal or impersonal. In that case, sure, impersonal. However, that to me is conditional upon the idea that a foundational source of all possibility and impossibility has somehow been established. Based on what I understand from Darth's arguments over the years, and from what I've read about presuppositional apologetics on my own, this foundation for an absolute foundation for all possibility and impossibility is being asserted by the apologist. It's being asserted by the believer. The idea that they don't have to actually substantiate that is built on the idea that, well, if you have to substantiate it, it's no longer the foundation, which gives you a convenient source. I could be very dishonest to Darth and say, well, here's my thing. I think what's foundational for all of reality is whatever preceded the Big Bang, that there's this transcendental energy that kickstarted everything, and that it's an impersonal force, but it is absolutely responsible for the existence of everything. And then try to argue from that. I could assert the exact same thing. And if he says, well, hey, I want you to tell me how it has this property or that property or this property or that property, all I have to do is say, you questioning my source, my foundational absolute, means that you are somehow independent of it, and that makes you wrong from the start.
No, he doesn't have to answer that.
But that's
Or
how it
actually,
works. That's
you-
how it works that's how it works for Presup. If I put myself, look, it doesn't matter what I believe. What matters is that I'm beginning to put myself in a position of evaluating the proposition, God or not God. It doesn't matter which one I choose. The problem that I'm running into is that I believe that choice is mine to make in the first place, that I independently select the belief, God or not God. If you believe in a presuppositional apologetic, at least according to Richard L. Pratt Jr.'s book, that the idea of approaching the proposition means you've approached it from an independent stance, which means you are denying the creator-creature distinction, which means you are automatically wrong. So if Darth is asking me to, hey, which one do you choose? He's assuming that I'm assuming my own independence. But if I do think there's an absolute foundation that's different than God and it's impersonal, I'm dependent on that. I'm not assuming my independence, and I'm not violating the creator-creature distinction. I think I'm a creature created by an impersonal universe, or some impersonal power that is responsible for absolutely everything that creates the universe the way it is, that made it be the way that it is. But it's not his God. So I can turn around and make the exact same claim to him. No, you're automatically assuming that you have the ability to choose God or not God from your own independent stance. And I'm telling you, the universe has made you dependent. You assuming that you can be independent was your first mistake. End of argument.
Well, he has actually answered to that objection, Jefferson. And
he hasn't answered to that. So if he goes back and watches this, I'd like to hear it.
No, he didn't answer here in this stream. But in all the interactions, your objection has come up frequently. And he says if you remove God as a source of what is possible and impossible, then you are basically left without any source which secures what is possible. And
I'm right. But what I'm saying, no, hang on. No, I before you get into more points, let me address that one because that's important. I'm not denying that. I believe it's just as important to assert that, right? It's just as important to assume that kind of foundational thing, right? But Darth's got the wrong one identified. He thinks it's the God of the Bible. I'm saying it's an impersonal thing. And when he puts himself in a position of determining whether that thing is real or not real, the same proposition being presented by a lot of apologists to Christians. Okay, this is the proposition, God or not God? Not God. Okay, what's your reason for not God? Well, and then they go off on, and then the script goes on. The interrogation continues. Getting to that point is literally beside the point. The fact that you put yourself in a position of independence to weigh both sides of the proposition means you are attempting to act independently of God, or you're attempting to act independently of an absolute, impersonal, foundation of all possibility and possibility. However you want to describe it, you're wrong from the start.
Well, I hope that Darth comes back, and may he correct me if I am answering not in the way that he would answer, but as far as I understood, if you posit an impersonal source as the cause of everything that is possible or not possible, that source, as not being personal, has not the power to define actually what is possible or not possible. And what would the consequence be? It would be that, for example, laws of physics, they could pop up and go away in a stochastic and arbitrary manner, and you couldn't secure and have a stable universe and physical beings and physical things.
Not necessarily. Okay, well, there's a couple issues with that. So let me point this out, because first thing, do you believe in the doctrine of divine simplicity?
Yes.
Okay. Do you believe that it's not the case that God has the properties of omniscience, omnibenevolence, omnipotence, etc.? He is those traits. Do you believe that? Because that's the doctrine of divine simplicity. He is omnipotence. He is that power.
Well, omnipotence has to be defined, and anything that is illogical, like that he can create square circles or that he can lie and say the truth at the same time and things like that, he cannot do. He can do whatever is possible.
Right, but that's not what I'm saying. I'm not trying to get into that whole, because I don't like that argument. Could God make a rock bigger than he could lift kind of thing. That's not what I'm going with. Do you believe that is it theologically and philosophically accurate to say that God is good?
Yes.
Is it philosophically and theologically accurate to say good is God?
What I am saying is that I go with his self-revelation. He has self-revealed himself as good, so I accept and believe that upon what he has revealed of himself to us.
Right, but you said that you believe that God is, you believe in the doctrine of divine simplicity. You believe he's simple, not complex.
Yes.
But part of the doctrine of divine simplicity is not that it's not the case that God has goodness or God demonstrates his goodness. God is that goodness. That's.
But I have a quick question. But isn't there complexity and simplicity? So God could be simple and complex, no?
Yeah, but I mean, from that particular theological stance, the idea is to, if you get God as a set of different things, then he starts contradicting his nature. If you want to say that he's absolute. And so the idea is to whittle him down to one thing, right? That makes him absolute. Because if you can start thinking, if God can appeal to a goodness different than his own nature, then goodness is greater than him, which would mean God is an absolute. You have an absolute goodness out there that God either instantiates or is attempting to live up to. One of the instantiation of our absolute goodness is better than, him attempting, like saying that he tries to achieve goodness.
No, okay, I think that he is good in his nature.
Well, Superman is good in his nature, but he doesn't exist. Nothing. All right, moving on.
Sorry. No, but I mean, but even Superman Superman can do bad things, right? And if anybody that's watched the Snyder Cut knows, no spoilers here, but Soup can get bad. No, I mean. This is my issue with this, because this is one of the things. This is why I think that particular the concept of that God obviously can exist, because Anselm and Aquinas and even Augustine to certain degrees kind of like pushed this kind of ontological idea of him in Anselm's case, and also kind of put forward this idea of divine simplicity. Plantinga didn't like it, right? Plantinga doesn't believe in, like, he presented an argument against, I think, using non-constituent ontology, and sort of like kind of deconstructs divine simplicity, because he thinks that it's a category error. You're trying to equate God with goodness. Goodness is a property, and a property can't be causal. So God can't be a property and be causal. You've got a bunch of violations happening there. What I'm saying in terms of like going back to Darth's original point is he's asking me, like, do you believe in this sort of foundational thing that can exist, right? That's not enough, even for him. It has to be personal, and it has to be a mind, right? And he's actually getting to the personal by asserting that it is a mind to begin with, which is slightly different. But at that point, you still haven't gotten anywhere to anything that, like, I mean, let's say that I assume everything that he's talking about. Like, okay, let's say that there needs to be this absolute foundation. It's the source of all possibility and impossibility, and it put everything in motion. Here's the thing. Darth has said, and I think you probably agree with this, Otangelo, that God is not only the creator of everything, he's the sustainer of it. Do you believe that?
Yes.
Okay. So if he's sustaining... Go ahead.
I just wanted to say, so if I understand correctly, God is the Higgs boson? Nobody got the joke? Come on.
Anyway, yeah. Here's the thing. If what the original objection that you mentioned, the thing that you mentioned, Otangelo, was about the idea of like, well, we couldn't count on the regularity of nature. And this is a classic mistake, I think, that's made, because it's kind of a projection against atheists, right? From an atheist perspective, there would be this notion of, and it's something that's assumed even in that presuppositional apologetic book that you gave me. You have to assume an orderly universe in order to make sense of our human existence, right? But that's not exactly how it happens, right? From a that makes sense if you're already operating from a presuppositional apologetic mindset, right? You have to assume God in order to make sense of things that he created, right? Or creation, especially if you're going to assume that reality is just a creation from a creator. But the notion that skeptics are doing that, or you're approaching that from a scientific method, that's not the case. The issue is we observe things in nature that seem to be orderly. And the more we observe and the more that we can track, we can find more and more systems that are seemingly orderly. That doesn't necessarily mean that every aspect of the universe is orderly. We don't understand everything in the universe. So it's not we're assuming order and then impose, and then we see that order when we do these experiments. When those observations are made and you can experiment with them, you're experimenting with them to make sure that they're consistent, right? That's the scientific method. It's counterintuitive to the way our brains tend to think. We tend to agree with something intuitively and then try to find evidence to support it, to kind of satisfy our bias. Scientific method is built to reverse that process and prevent us from doing that. So you're trying to work from those observations, and you can conclude from there that these are seemingly orderly, and you can get a lot of different examples of them. But it's a non sequitur to say from these things we get a completely ordered universe in the way that these things are. That it just seems like you're kind of projecting outward onto that. Now, the reason I said that is that the idea that you can't rely, if you don't have a reliable universe, things fall apart. If you have a God that equals power, right? If divine simplicity is a true theological doctrine and this being doesn't have all power, he is all power, and he sustains the universe through that power, and you have miracles, you have an unreliable universe.
Well, the thing is that using the Presup approach, you start from the premise that God reveals himself to us, and he is the source upon which we can actually understand reality. And if you don't start from that presupposition, then you start from the presupposition that your understanding, your mind, is the last arbiter upon which you try to make sense of reality. And when you do that, then you are already starting from a premise which is not sound, which is not...
So is the problem that one is trying to rely on a mind?
The thing is that we are limited in understanding reality. And if we start from the presupposition that God reveals himself to us, and we believe that he has done that through scripture and nature, then we can come to a real understanding of truth and reality. And when we don't do that, then we start from the presupposition that we are the ultimate instance and arbiter of what is true and what is not true. But we start from the premise that we can reason in a sound manner without referencing to God as source of truth.
But that's not the dichotomy, right? So there's the one.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
What do you use to understand God, Otangelo?
I start from the premise that God is the necessary being which grounds reality and from which everything else is derived and dependent, and that he is the independent ultimate reality upon which things are possible and not possible. He basically secures and instantiates what is possible and what is not possible. And when you remove that source, then basically things become arbitrary or stochastic. There can be basically anything. The laws of physics.
You didn't really answer my question. You're not answering my question. What did you use to come about what you just said?
As I said, I start from the premise that God has revealed himself to us.
I don't want to know where you started. I want to know what you use to arrive at the conclusion. What is it that you're using?
What do you mean by that?
How are you making the claim that you're making? How are you recognizing revelation?
My point is you're using your brain to come to that conclusion.
Well, that's precisely where actually Darth constantly starts. And he asks, is God the ultimate foundation of reality upon which what is possible or not possible can be referenced to? And then you can either say, yes, he is, or you can say he is not. Once you say that reality can exist apart and separated from that source, then his next question is, well, what actually secures what is possible and what is not possible?
But what did you use to come to the conclusion or the assumption that reality is dependent?
Because if you remove God as the ultimate source of that, then basically anything is possible. Laws of physics, they can pop up. And
you mean like sustaining a sun in the sky for 24 hours, like in the book of Joshua?
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. You mean like then miracles could happen?
Yeah, sure. That would be possible too.
Okay,
But
so let me
hold on. If just one real quick, if miracles can happen, then nature doesn't act in some law-like way. If miracles can happen, then the future is not like the past, like you always claim.
If God instantiates the laws of physics, then of course he can either secure them, or he can, for miracles to happen, remove them for a certain moment or
If
for a certain action.
If that's the case, then nature doesn't act in a law-like way, like you claim that it does.
Also, I would let's take this in a slightly different direction. Let's say, for the sake of argument, because I'm not convinced that that's a good way to jump to, because you have to assume that reality is dependent. You know, in order to, like, the properties that you're attributing to a God, you're saying that reality or existence, for whatever reason, it's necessarily the case that reality is deficient of those properties and requires the God you're asserting to be there to provide that. But let's just concede the fact that that's where you're going. How does one reject that? If reality is as dependent on that creator being, not only for the creation of reality, right? Reality is depending on its creation, and it's sustaining by the constant power of God, right?
Right.
How does someone, and I'm asking this seriously, by what means does someone reject it?
Well, by the means that the opposite is absurd and impossible, because then you have no mechanism to secure what is actually possible.
I didn't. Hang on. I'm sorry to interrupt. I didn't ask why the objection is irrational. I asked, how does one object to it? By what means can an individual take to object to that total dependency reality requires?
I think I just answered that by the fact that it would be an absurd situation where you remove the prime mover, and then you have basically nothing that actually secures what is possible and impossible. And
right,
then basically anything goes, then you have chaos.
Okay, but I'm saying, how is it possible? I agree from that perspective that it seems like it should be absurd. I'm asking, how does one fly on one's own? And you're describing, and you seem to be saying that, you know, you're like describing the clouds or something. How does one? Granted, it's absurd. You know, if that's the case, if God, his will and his constant power is necessary for the creation and sustenance of the entire universe in its current state and since its inception, how does a person go about denying that if they're that dependent on that reality and that God?
Because we are, in our thinking, limited, first of all, and secondly, we cannot come to know with absolute certainty about ultimate reality, which is beyond the physical universe. Metaphysics is something which...
Then how do you know God exists? How do you know there has to be a fundamental?
Yeah, and I would also...
by his revelation through the scriptures and reality, and the natural world.
Oh, tangible. That's also how we know everything that's physical, according to that apologetic. We can't know anything without God. Darth does this all the time. I can't assert facts without referencing God, because those facts reference God. That's basically like kind of the first part of most of his interrogations to skeptics, which, okay, fine, that's what you want to do. What doesn't follow from that is that I don't understand how an individual in that kind of a reality, right? Like the book that you gave me, right, to read. The guy posits that the reason that sin occurs, the fall of man occurs, not because Eve just disobeyed God. It's
just a
worse
minute. Let me close my door here. My daughter is talking behind me. Just a minute.
The notion seems to be that the fact that she's in a situation where they've been told by God that the fruit on the tree, the knowledge of good and evil, that is forbidden. If they eat it, they'll die. Right? Claim number one, coming from God. They're dependent on God. They're not supposed to eat it. Now the serpent appears and tells her, yeah, that's a little bit different than that. If you eat it, it'll make you wise, and you won't die. Right? She's now in a position, according to Richard L. Pratt, the issue of the sin that happened there wasn't the fact that she ate the apple, right? It was the fact that she decided on her own. It was the fact that instead of acknowledging her and Adam's total dependency on God, she put herself in a position to be an arbiter of two claims, one from the serpent and one from God, decides for herself, this one seems okay, then hands this off to Adam. Adam follows suit, and that's what gets them into trouble, and that's what spreads. That's the sin that goes from, out from there. The problem with this notion is he then goes on to say, I think on page 39, that her capacity for disobedience, her capacity to hold the notion that she could be independent to make the determination between those claims depends on God. That's how dependent she is.
Okay, Jefferson, I started today read Bonson's book, Presuppositional Apologetics. I've put it here if you want to put it on the stream. I think he straightforward answers what your inquiry is right now. If you want, you can show it and we can go through it.
Let's see. Well, unfortunately, with my screen. Okay, here we go. Let's see here. I apologize to anybody in the chat. I gotta expand the. I've only got the one screen. I gotta expand streaming. Okay.
I can put it bigger if the letters are too small.
No, I can read it. Does the fact that ultimate principles are strictly incapable of external verification leave us with a guessing game at the beginning of our thinking? Does the fact that ultimate principles are strictly incapable of external verification? Well, you're kind of assuming something there with ultimate principles. One of the problems with assuming that there's such a thing as ultimate principles is, are those principles the same thing as the ultimate from which they're derived? Because if you're talking about an ultimate, you have to get down to one thing. What is justifiably believed and true? A true proposition asserts a certain state of affairs to be the case when, in fact, that is the state of affairs. Justification is conferred on certain types of reasons or warrants because of the relatively high degree of success they have in engendering true belief. Because God has clearly revealed himself to all men by means of nature, man's own constitution and scripture. Men do not begin with a mere guess about reality. Only if Christianity were untrue, which it isn't, would this dire conclusion follow. Yeah, I still don't see how they're getting to that. Because in this case, he's talking about justified true beliefs, and then trying to go like, "Hey, you can be presented with a proposition. Does it conform to the actual state of affairs? State of affairs can be demonstrated. God can't, unless you try to turn God into what happens with kind of Antillian presuppositional apologetics, which is no. That the only reason that you can have stuff is because you have to assume God in the first place. God's necessary, but he's non-demonstrable, right? So it's basic. He's in a category so completely different that you don't even get to argue about him. But I'm not saying that Bonson's doing that. I'm saying that I think that the guy that I just read, Pratt, was kind of doing that with his take.
I am presenting you the line of reasoning which goes with Presup, and I think Bonson is with Van Til is one of the two big authorities of that approach.
Right, but Pratt's take on this was inconsistent with this, right? Pratt's take on it when he's trying, and granted, his book is being presented toward late high school, early college kids. I think that was John Frame's forward on the book was saying that this is what Pratt was attempting to go for. When he's presenting those ideas, it's Pratt's take on it is to constantly tell the non-believer they have to acknowledge that their total dependence on God. And they have to stop. They have to stop this denying the creator-creature distinction. He hammers that, especially the last third of the book, the last 40, 50 pages of the book. All of his little techniques are just hammering that point home over and over again.
This is one of the crucial points of Presup, that distinction of creator-creature.
But I can make a creator-creature distinction in saying that. Christians are violating a creator-creature distinction because they've placed a concept above the minds that hold the concept and are trying to make us dependent on something with which is dependent on us. So for instance, I hold in my head the concept of a being that is absolute, all powerful, and is the foundation for anything and everything. I can have that concept in my mind, and then I can act as if like, right, I can hold that around and then use that to kind of inform certain beliefs about the reality around me. That it does not follow that that's actually the case. It could just be that I, as a thinking being, have created a concept or have instantiated some kind of concept that is dependent on my mind. It's a product of human minds.
Well, the thing is, we have to start with the presupposition. Either it is that revelation comes from God, or that we are our ultimate instance upon which we try to make sense of reality.
Yeah, but I again, there's this issue is fraught with a lot of problems, because the idea of a foundation for all of reality, right? Probably, like, at least in terms, like, let's put it this way. Let's give it an example. Let's say that in the next 10 years, there are a physicist, or there's physicists that conclusively come up with a unified field theory, right? A theory essentially for all of reality within physics. You know, it's sort of the holy grail, right? They come up with that. Are Christians at that point going to continue? Are they going to acknowledge that that is an impersonal foundation for everything?
Well, Jefferson, I see it like this. I mean, if you know my background, I come from an evidential apologetics background. That's what I have done in the last years, okay? And what I am seeing all along, if we start from the beginning to the universe, to fine-tuning, to the origin of life, to biodiversity, to morality, to consciousness.
Sorry, that's not what I meant to do. I tried to make room for a spot, and I removed Otangelo because his shared thing was taking up extra space. Sorry, I should have done that. Otangelo, that link's still. Did I click that? Did I pin that? I didn't. We put it back in there.
Yeah, I was going to say, you didn't pin it. I had to scroll all the way to the top to get it.
Yeah, I forgot to pin it the second time. Let me put that back in there. Sorry, Otangelo, I did not mean to do that.
Kicked him by accident. A likely excuse.
Yeah. Hopefully he doesn't like, Darth, it happened to me too. He kicked me too.
If you don't start with my presupposition, then you can't know anything. Case closed.
Right. Yeah, and I'm still trying to figure out why the property of it being personal would preclude a Christian from a skeptic from essentially saying the same thing. They don't have to acknowledge the existence of a Christian God with all these properties. They just have to acknowledge some kind of foundational source for absolutely everything, and it could be impersonal, right? And it just creates everything. And once you have that, then you can go from there. I'm not understanding how this affects people's epistemology, though, and that's the secondary claim. Sorry about that, Otangelo. I was trying to clean up some stuff in the back room to make more space, and I kicked you when I was just trying to sorry. This is what
happens when my brother is proactive. Things get fucked up.
Yeah.
Do you want me to put that script from Bunsen again on the screen? Do you want to continue it, or?
Yeah, no, that's okay. I mean, I've read some Bunsen stuff before, but I think, like, from what I was getting at, it was there are some presuppositionalists who will do like what Bunsen does, where they're like, hey, you can try to rationalize this from this case, but that's not really like the other kind of presuppositionalism, at least the stuff that I'm more familiar with Van Til, is if you're putting yourself in a position where you're evaluating truth claims as if they're your own. That's one of the contradictions that Pratt has in his book, because he'll talk about, hey, you need to make, you can be wrong about certain things even as a Christian, but you have to rely on God to give you, to inform your reason to make good choices and come to correct conclusions. And it's like, okay, well, that's fine, but he doesn't actually explore any kind of discernible method that would be any different between a believer and a non-believer when it comes to evaluating propositions, especially when he's made the claim that the reason original sin exists is because Eve put herself in a position of evaluating a proposition. Fruit bad, fruit good. She made the decision on her own. She made it. That's his point, and that's the part that I don't understand. Like, how is that kind of idea about the function of reality superimposing these weird notions onto our epistemology. I don't understand that.
So let me try to explain that. I think that if we come to metaphysics, it is basically an extended arm from evidential apologetics. Why? I've listed all these things previously before I was removed, which I see there is no sound explanation if you remove a conscient, intelligent creator to actually instantiate these things and select what makes life possible. And that starts from the fine-tuning, which has to be selected to have the right parameters to have a life-permitting universe. Then in regards of the origin of life, there, if you remove a selector, then there is no selection left. There is no alternative selection possible to select, for example, the basic building blocks of life. And for example, there are over 500 amino acids supposedly possible that they existed on the prebiotic Earth. There was no selection process to select those amino acids which are actually used in life.
Okay,
And
but
then,
again, this, I mean, I could probably just excuse what you're talking about right now, especially as you're starting to get into you're presupposing that this selection needs to occur. You're anthropomorphizing that selection process.
no,
You're
No.
assuming that you are holding in your head an assumption that the interaction of this type of physical matter over time, it couldn't be the case that those things interacting in a chemical physical way could result in
I don't
life or whatever.
presuppose that. Sorry, Jefferson, to interrupt you, but I do
No,
not presuppose
no, I
that.
know. No,
I
whoa, whoa,
say that
no,
based
hang
on
on.
scientific evidence.
Otangelo, stop. I'm starting to lose my patience. I am not saying you presuppose it. I'm saying you've reached the conclusion that for you is impossible. Now you're trying to presuppose and insert there must be a consciousness involved, and then you're working back towards that.
Hey, Jeff.
But that's an anthropomorphication of the process.
Jeff, may I add something? I thought it interesting that he said, "I don't want to presuppose that." Well, then why doesn't that claim work for those not wanting to presuppose a God as the necessary thing for all of creation?
And I would warn that if you end up the point of presuppositional apologetics, if you follow it to its logical, I don't want to say conclusion, but to its logical foundation, its beginning, you are literally working against the scientific method. You are and this is why I think it's self-serving, because this is the dangerous thing. If someone like me is not convinced of a God, is being told by a presuppositionalist that I have to assume that God in order for anything else to exist, right? Okay, I'll just go with that. That doesn't necessarily do anything for me unless I also believe the claims that by doing that, I start to unite with this God, or his Holy Spirit starts to regenerate my heart, and that actually has a supernatural effect on my ability to reason and changes my capacity to know things and understand things. But if you can't demonstrate that change, you can find plenty of examples of Christians that don't know things or get things wrong. Darth and you talk to them all the time. So if you work from there and then try to work back, you're not going to really get anywhere. So the necessary point of a presuppositionalist is like, my God is true, and from this I can then get look at all this stuff out there. How did this, it's impossible for these amino acids to combine this way. It was impossible for the universe to be this size. It's impossible for the orderliness of our solar system to be a thing. It's all this stuff, just assume, and then say, what's the possible explanation for it? A personal mind that's responsible for the creation of absolutely all reality. Okay, but your demonstration of that being is the stuff it's dependent on, not the thing itself. You can't justify or demonstrate that thing as a thing outside of its relation to the things you claim that are dependent on it. And that is a wild assumption to make.
Hey, Jeff, I posted something to you in Discord.
Okay. As I said previously, either you start from the presupposition that God reveals himself truth, or you can start with human concepts like the scientific method and think that will lead you to
missed the
truth
point.
in regards of origins.
The problem is that you're basically saying that if you see a tree, you assume God.
No, God is eventually the conclusion or not, depending where the evidence leads you.
How do you get a conclusion to a God without being able to demonstrate the God on its own?
And again, I would say, if you're trying to work this evidentially, you are putting yourself in a position that Richard Pratt states is automatically sinful. If you're evaluating a proposition, and it's a basic proposition, A or B, the fact that you believe on your own that you can appropriately evaluate that position is a denial of the creator-creation distinction and an insistence on your own independence. You are wrong from the beginning. It's not
Right.
whether or not you chose A or B, which one's correct and which one isn't, according to God. The fact that you put yourself in a position thinking that you're the one who's supposed to be choosing is automatically against God. That Pratt's system of presuppositional apologetics puts a person in a position of being independent enough to get themselves into trouble, but they're still dependent on that capacity to delude themselves into believing they're independent. He even states that. So you have contradiction after contradiction within that setup. So it's as if God doesn't want moist robots, but God wants people that act as if they are moist robots because they understand that's the most righteous way to obey God. That's the most righteous way to behave, as if God's in total control. But they have just enough independence to allow themselves to God's giving them enough leash to hang themselves. And then believers, especially presuppositionals, wonder why skeptics think, well, this God seems like he's just gaslighting people or just jerking their chain. It's not a well thought out. The implications of it, I don't think, are appreciated by most presuppositionalists.
As I said you previously, Jefferson, I come from a background of evidentialism. Here is the evidence. Where does it lead us?
Right.
And I have so far used abductive reasoning to the best explanation and eliminative inductions. If one proposition is not true, then the other must be true by default. In regards, if the proposition there is a God or there is no God, that are the two possibilities.
I do
and
have a
if
question.
The no God,
well, hold on. But how did you do that? How did you do that? Could you do that without knowing the concept of a God?
What do you mean?
Could you have been able to make these come to the best conclusion or inference to the best possibility or inference to the best conclusion if you were never introduced to the concept of God or gods?
I see where you're going.
Well, I started from that proposition and that framework. Either there is a mind, a creator. Well, I'm explaining.
Well, you started from an assumption and then worked your way to a conclusion to your assumption. That's a cognitive bias.
Now, what I was doing, I was forming an epistemological framework upon which I could investigate origins, and that starts with the questioning what are actually the possible sources or answers in regards to explain reality. And I say there are basically just two possible sources. One is that there is a necessary eternal conscient creator and intelligence at the bottom of reality, which instantiates what is possible or what is not possible. Can I finish? Can I finish, please? Or there is on the other side.
But you're going on and on.
Wow. Jefferson was talking for over 5 minutes. Nobody interrupted him.
Sorry, go ahead,
if you guys do not have patience that I can make a point, well, then I just leave, and there is no sense that I am here interacting with you guys.
I'm good. I'm just that's fine. But you're just kind of making my point for me, because you're not, if you keep making the claim that the God is necessary. But in order to say something is necessary, you have to demonstrate the thing that is necessary on its own. If you're saying trees come from God, but you haven't demonstrated God as a necessity, you're just assuming that gods are necessary for trees because you see trees.
Jay, I was going to respond to that, but you interrupted me. And
Oh, you're good. Go ahead. Just
Well, I think you were on your some of that stuff. I wasn't exactly following A to B to C. I think you were starting to make a couple separate points while you were talking. So if you can just kind of wrap up your initial point, and then we'll go on.
well, my approach has been to make first epistemological framework that
Right.
leads me to two propositions: either there is a God or B, no God. Okay,
Well, that's just
And
a
then-
proposition, right?
and then
But-
I ask, what entails things that intelligence can do, which non-intelligence cannot do, and then we look around us into nature, and then we can eventually see signs of intelligence which
What
has
makes you
had
think?
to
What makes
interact-
you think? Yeah, but you're making that decision on your own. What makes you think that as a creature totally dependent on God, that you have the right to evaluate that proposition without first? I mean, you can't conclude God from the thing that is saying that is necessarily the case.
Well,
All right.
Jefferson, I was coming to that. That has been so far the way that I was framing my apologetics, by being an evidentialist apologetic. Okay, and I have started very recently to try to understand better the Presup approach. Okay, so I am not versed like Darth is in regards to answer these questions, and of course there are two conflicting ways to approach these questions, or maybe they aren't even conflicting. I don't know. I am trying to see if I can actually use both approaches to make my case. I don't know if it is exclusive one to the other, and then I will have to decide if I continue with evidentialism or if I entirely adopt the Presup argumentation. But what I see is that atheists constantly do not understand actually what Darth is saying. And I confess that I have had difficulties as well for several months that I'm listening to him, but I am trying to get there, and I am saying, try to break this down in order that it is more understandable by those which are not familiar with the terms that you use.
Okay, I actually have a question, right? Before the entire argument boils down, trees exist, therefore God. Well, many of us would agree that trees are good. They're nice, they're nice to look at. But okay, does the let's just call it the Spanish flu prove God? Why does only good prove God but not bad? I know that's getting into the argument of evil, problem of evil, but you know what I mean? It's kind of in the background, right? Trees exist, therefore God. Right? Do you get the point?
Well, there's a point made in the book that I'd referenced earlier where Pratt makes an observation that all of creation, an observation of all of creation would turn all people to the notion of the Creator. But then he goes on to say, we need Scripture because sin prevents that from happening. So he kind of contradicts himself a little bit there. But the other thing that he also says is that the creation in and of itself, and because God is sustaining the universe through his power, everything that's happening in the universe is a testament to him, to his existence, right? And his creating and sustaining power. Okay, so trees exist, therefore God. If I'm a Christian and if I'm a believer and I really want to be consistent with the presuppositional apologetic as laid out by someone like Pratt and some others, I could take what I'm getting from that and say genocide, therefore God. Genocide is an act of God's creatures, and the only reason that it's possible for man to annihilate other portions of humanity is because God's power is sustaining the reality that this is happening in.
And that's
I don't disagree with that. I agree with you, Jefferson, because he makes free will possible, and therefore people can do awful things.
But according to Pratt, no, our free will is completely dependent on God.
I don't agree with that.
Okay, well that's an issue then, because in presuppositional apologetics, the notion that if you're going to go with this idea that we're created to be these beings, right? We have the capacity to make our own choices, right? We end up with presuppositional stuff, and I think even in some cases Reformed epistemology, what you end up with is just enough Calvinism to make you think that you're doomed without God, but you're saved with him, but just enough Arminianism that it's all your fault if things work out bad. You didn't make the right choices, you didn't do the right thing, right? And those impositions are based on human needs to beg off holding God responsible for bad things they don't want to take credit for in reality, and a way to hold themselves separate from the people they think are behaving poorly. That seems to be the nature of most of Christian religion in a nutshell.
Well, I've been very clearly in regards how I see that, and I don't think I have to repeat myself.
Okay. I want to just say a quick hello to Darth Dawkins Debunked the website. I don't think you've ever been on my channel, so this is nice. If Darth showing up on this got you in here, I'm honored. If you'd like to join, I pinned the link in the top chat if you want to jump in. I'd be interested to ask some questions about you, because I've been to your website before, and it's as frustrating. It's more frustrating than Darth. It's what you've created is really incredible. I haven't been on there in a while, but
I don't know. I don't know if
I didn't understand what you're talking about, Jefferson.
What's up?
What were you talking about? What website?
Darth Dawkins Debunked, the website. That's his YouTube username. He has a website where he does kind of it's sort of a question answer tree. So he'll ask, like, did Darth ever say this ABC? And then you pick one. The results are, if you've never been, take a look. It is still up, right? I'm asking to him. Hopefully he responds in the live chat.
Yes. But
yeah,
as I was trying to ask, I don't think Jay's question from earlier was answered.
Yeah, no, I don't think he addressed it, because I mean, Artangela, and correct me if I'm wrong. I get that you're going from an evidentialist stance, and now you're starting to get into the presuppositional apologetic. And you'll take this with a grain of salt anyway, because I'm a skeptic. If you're attempting to reconcile the two approaches, I think that's a mistake. There's one thing I agreed with Cy ten Bruggen, Kate. He did the same thing that you're describing. He started it with an evidentialist approach in his apologetics, and then as he found that it wasn't working on some people, he shifted over to the presuppositional one. He started reading more from Bonson and others, and that was his switch. He, in some of his instructional videos and stuff, which I think are still available, you can still find them on YouTube, basically says, like, if you're going to, he basically just disowned the evidentialist approach. He believed it was incompatible with presuppositionalism. So if you can reconcile the two of them, I would be surprised. But yeah, watch some of his stuff to see, if you can get any kind of
one thing I can say to you, that I mean, the knowledge which I have accumulated along the years in regards of the usual talking points, which is evolution, abiogenesis, cosmology, consciousness, morality, and so forth, this will keep going on. And this is something which those which have invested entirely and only in Presup, they are usually not very versed in these issues. So I will not simply abandon them. And I mean, for me, it's fun actually to investigate biology and biochemistry and so forth. So I will never stop, investigate, or keep going and having conversations with unbelievers and others about these issues. Now, what I am looking is to understand better that Presup approach, and then eventually I don't know where it goes from there. But I don't think I will ever abandon the issues in regards of evidence.
Well, I do want to put this out here because I want to wrap things up, because it's been going for almost 2 hours, and I kind of want to close this out. I got some things that I'd like to do. And I don't like these to go on much longer than 2 hours. I think that's just trying everybody's patience. So in conclusion, so if Darth checks in again and he wants to like listen to this is one thing that and especially Otangelo, if you take this to him, if you guys discuss this later, I don't approach the Bible and Christianity the way a lot of atheists tend to do. I will like go along with jokes and stuff, and like, this, joshing and that kind of stuff that happens between like different atheists and stuff. But I don't have anything against the Bible. I actively study the Old Testament and the New Testament. I find them both interesting. I don't reject the concepts of gods. I think I don't think all of them are incoherent. I do think that the kind of God that's being posited by most Christians today, especially if they're presuppositionalists like Darth Dawkins, I think is incoherent. And it would take me a while to unpack that. But I'm not approaching it because I'm an anti-theist or a misotheist. I'm not approaching it because I have something against the Bible. That's not the thing. And in moving forward, like if you're, I applaud you. You've started with evidentialism. You're getting into other apologetics. That's great. As you move forward, I hope that the people that you deal with moving forward are as ecumenical as you when dealing with multiple apologetic approaches. I'm afraid that I think you're going to end up running into some. I think you may already have. You'll end up running into some that will kind of dig their heels in and say, no, if you're going to be a presup, you're going to be presup all the way. If you're going to do this, you can't allow any room for evidentialism. I suspect that might happen to you. Maybe it hasn't yet, and if that's the case, yeah, keep exploring all of them. Keep keep looking, but. Hopefully, yeah, we can have this discussion again, and if you want, hope maybe later in the week, if you've got some free time, we can review that video from MathPig's channel, the one between Darth and Randolph, if you want to go over it.
Can I ask Otangelo a really quick question?
If it's really quick, yeah.
Okay, well, say if you were never taught that God exists, how would you be able to determine? I mean, it's next time, but it's just, I don't know. I find that question really interesting, right? How would you determine God's existence if you were never exposed to that concept in the first place? Like, would you even come up with it?
If there would be no direct revelation through scriptures, I think that the natural world by itself screams loud out of God as the creator.
There was one thing that I thought was kind of strange about some of the claims that Richard Pratt made in that book. One of them was he basically divides up, and I'll make this last point because it goes to what Midnight's talking about. He makes a claim that there's a difference between Christians and non-Christians, and he makes it as binary as that. There's people that believe and there's people that don't believe. And the central distinction that he makes is that non-Christians, the second group of people, believe in their independence, and they deny the creator-creature distinction. What I find fascinating about that, and this was written in the 80s, so and the guy was probably only 26 or 27 at the time that he wrote it, was this is an incredibly blinkered way of thinking about it, because there are plenty of non-Christians who are raised in a majority culture of another religion. I'm thinking of Islam, where they would have grown up aware of other religions like Christianity or whatever. But in Islam, especially apologetics that have existed for the Muslim faith in the last 20 years are very similar to some Christian apologetics now. There are apologists for Islam that would make the same claims that Pratt's making. If you put yourself in a position where you're going to shop for religions outside of Islam, you're putting yourself in a position of independence from God. You are supposed to be dependent on Allah. And so Pratt makes this in a very and it's a very ignorant statement to make, because not all non-Christians, one, assert their independence from their concept of a creator, and two, deny the creator-creature distinction. So I just wanted to point that out, and I think that goes back to what Midnight's kind of saying there. I just wanted to expand on it. There are people in those kind of cult, because it's not enough that they're just in that religion. They didn't pick. A lot of people did not choose to be Muslim. That's part of their tradition. It's part of their heritage. They were raised in that. Once they become aware of other religions, then they put them in. If they decided, well, I'm going to convert to Christianity, I'm going to convert to Judaism or something like that, that's them deciding between options out there, and that's not a good thing if you're a presup from the Muslim side of things. So, leaving that out there, I'm going to wrap things up right now. But Otangelo, I will hit you up with an email later on if you want to go over that video later in the week, and we can kind of like discuss times and stuff. But I'm going to sign off right now. Everybody, it's been nice hearing from you. Take it easy, everybody.
Bye. Thanks for having me.